Hi, good evening. Welcome to Launching Justice, Conversations with District Attorney Candidates, hosted by the Players Coalition. Really appreciate everyone being here, and a special thank you to Clayton High School for graciously hosting us today. The Players Coalition is an independent 501c3, 501c4 organization working with professional athletes, coaches, and owners across leagues to improve social justice and racial equality in our country. Their work is focused on three key pillars: police and community relations, criminal justice reform, and education and economic advancement. The Players Coalition is solution-oriented, and members invest significant time and resources to educate themselves on various issues impacting their communities to identify where their influence can have the greatest impact. Regrettably, Chris Long, a leader in the Players Coalition and a member of the Philadelphia Eagles, flight was canceled earlier today, and his second flight as well. So unfortunately, he's not going to be joining us this evening. Tonight's forum will be moderated by Judge Michael Wolf. Michael A. Wolf is an attorney, former Missouri Supreme Court judge, and Chief Justice and Professor and Dean Emeritus of Saint University Law School. His current practice involves select matters related to litigation, governmental affairs, and public interest law. Wolf served for 13 years on the Supreme Court of Missouri, from 1998 to 2011, including 2 years as Chief Justice from 2005 to 2007. He returned to the faculty of St. Louis University in 2011 and became Dean of the Law School in 2013, serving until 2014. Please welcome our moderator.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here, and I just want to start out by saying thank you to the Players Coalition. I'm sitting in, even though I am not now, nor have I ever been a professional football player. I just want to make that clear in case anybody was mistaken me for something else. And so I know that the Players Coalition, including Chris Long, have taken a great interest in the issues that are raised in prosecutors' races because of their belief that our justice system is, in a sense, broken. Mass incarceration, the school to prison pipeline, cash bail, police shootings that continue to plague various communities around the country, including St. Louis County, the state of Missouri, in fact, the whole country. So it's our most vulnerable and historically marginalized communities within our region, people of color, people living in poverty, who are most harmed by this system. More than any other governmental official, it is the elected prosecuting attorney who has the power to shape and to change criminal justice policy. Because every day the prosecuting attorney makes decisions that have enormous impact on the people of this county. The prosecuting attorney and his staff decide who's charged and with what crime. Decides who gets diverted away from the criminal justice system and who must carry the burden of a criminal conviction. He decides when to seek prison sentences and for how long. The prosecuting attorney decides whether to seek rehabilitation or to emphasize retribution. It's clear that the prosecuting attorney has power. The power to prosecute and the power to sentence, and also the power to seek mercy and second chances. Comes with this immense responsibility to the public. With your votes, all of you, you will decide who will be your prosecuting attorney. For that reason, we're pleased to have the opportunity to at least hear from one of the candidates for this important office. I should say that in introducing the candidates, I'll start by saying the incumbent, Bob McCullough, if you've got a chair for him, in case he does show up. I got this assignment just a short while ago, and I sent him an email saying, why don't you come? Got nothing better, don't have any other plans, but I haven't heard. Bob, by the way, has served as prosecuting attorney in St. Louis County. This is, I think, his 28th year. I did the math. The county became a separate county in 1876, so that he served prosecuting attorney roughly 15% of the time that the county's been in existence, just for those of you who are keeping score. But here with us today, importantly, is Wesley Bell, who is a candidate running against Bob McCullough in the primary in August. He's running as a progressive black defense attorney. He's a city council member in Ferguson, and he's running the first time for prosecuting attorney. After graduating from the University of Missouri Columbia School of Law, Wesley Bell started his career at the Special Public Defender's Office. In 2013, he was appointed a judge and later as municipal court prosecutor in Riverview, Missouri, and he's been a prosecutor in the Consolidated Municipal Courts. He has been criticized, I think, for his roles there, where he helped implement uniform fine schedules across St. Louis County, as well as presided over the first court to implement a universal amnesty program for citizens, recalling all nonviolent municipal warrants after 2014. In 2015, the city of Ferguson elected Wesley Bell as a city councilman. He played a key role in part of the negotiation team for the city of Ferguson with the Department of Justice. He helped to negotiate and pass the Ferguson Consent Decree, which has brought the most comprehensive community policing and court reforms in the region to the city of Ferguson. Wesley lives in Ferguson. He's an alumnus of Hazelwood High School East and Lindenwood University. So that is my introduction of Wesley Bell, and he is going to start us off. You're the only candidate here today, so we're going to have you do an opening statement of a couple minutes just to introduce yourself to this fine audience, and then the Players Coalition has provided me with a list of penetrating questions. I'm not sure they're penetrating, but don't worry. We'll get to them. I think we'll have a robust discussion here, but also in the audience, you'll see there's little 3x5 cards that are there, and if you have questions as this discussion continues, please write your question down and give it to somebody who will be available to pick up the question. We'll take those up towards the end of the presentation. So, your opening statement.
First, thank you for being here. Thank you to the Players Coalition for hosting this. Thank you for being our super sub. Chris Long actually sent me a tweet apologizing for not being here, and that was really cool to me. So that was kind of exciting. I got notes I'm going to set up here. Hopefully Bob doesn't mind. So yeah, my name is Wesley Bell. I do serve as a Ferguson City Councilman in Ward 3. And I did serve on the negotiating committee to not only help write but also pass the consent decree and bringing community policing to St. Louis County, as well as court reforms, and not just in Ferguson, but working to bring these types of reforms throughout the region. And so we know that there's more to do, but when we look from whence we came, I think you can see tangible strides in the right direction. But again, I want to emphasize we got more to do. Also, I've started my career as a public defender. Through undergrad, I interned in the public defender's office and the special public defender's office once I graduated. So I got a chance to work in not only the city but the county and some of the rural areas. And working with this prosecutor's office, people say, well, you didn't work in that particular office, and to be quite frank, that was a choice that I made because I couldn't work in that office. With the things that I saw that we're doing, that we're going to talk about during this event, during this debate, the things that were going on in that office, I would have been fired because I would not have stood by them. Is that my phone?
No.
Okay, thank you. So Xavier has me mic'd up with his phone, and I'm like, you didn't turn your phone on. But yeah, so in addition to working with this prosecutor's office, but then working in just about every capacity in the criminal justice system, what I've seen is that the system is broken. There's a strong need for reform, and just like a lot of people in this room, August 2014 was an awakening moment for a lot of us. As a younger attorney at that time, I knew that there were problems in many of our courts, but I didn't know the scope of them. And so I'm proud to be one of the people, along with many people in this room, that once we were made aware of these problems, many of us stepped up to the plate. And we're continuing to do that because this is something that we'll continue to need to work toward.
Thank you. I'm going to start right off with the coalitions. We've got this kind of organized. I've got this kind of organized by topics. The first is policing, accountability, and really getting to the issue of racial disparities. Let's face it, throughout Missouri, discriminatory policing continues to drive racial disparities in the criminal justice system. In St. Louis County, only 25% of the population is black, but black drivers account for about, I think, 40% of vehicular stops. They're also searched, arrested, and jailed at a higher rate than whites, even though white drivers are more likely to have illegal items in their car. So the first question that comes from that is, if elected prosecuting attorney, how will you use your prosecutorial discretion to eliminate discriminatory policing practices?
Well, one thing that we know, that is a fact, that African Americans are much more likely to come in contact with the criminal justice system than whites. We know that. And growing up in North St. Louis County, I was one who was pulled over several times, taken out of the car searched, and I look at it from my perspective. I mean, I was not, and my mom's here, she knows I was not a threat to anyone. I was a typical kid into talking to girls on the phone, because that's all we did back then, is talked on the phone, playing Tecmo Bowl. These are the kind of things that I did as a teenager. And so I was pulled over enough in my teenage to young in my early 20s that I didn't think it was a big deal. And I've told this story before, I literally did not know that there was something wrong until I got to law school. And I'm reading the case law, and I'm like, hold on, this wasn't right. So we know that this happens. We know that African American males make up about 8% of the population in Missouri, but yet make up close to 40% of the prison population. So we know that these racial disparities exist. We know that they must be addressed, and I think that it starts with transparency. If I get the honor of serving as your next prosecutor, we're going to publish the data with respect to who we're prosecuting, who's being pulled over, who's being arrested, because I think that's the only way that you can address the issue is that if you're open and honest and transparent about what you're doing. How can you improve your practices if you don't know what your practices are and you're not being honest? And if there are individual prosecutors that are doing these kind of practices, then they need to be corrected or potentially removed. I know that there's a lot of prosecutors in that office that I know that, I'm not going to say a lot, but there's several that need to go. I'm just going to say that. But there's some that would benefit from a change of culture. And again, there's going to be some people that we need to bring in. But these are issues that I think start with transparency. Start with publishing this data. Start with being clear with our policies and making sure that everyone knows what those policies are.
St. Louis County is, especially since 2014, known throughout the country for the police involved shooting Michael Brown, as well as the fact that the officer, Darren Wilson, was not indicted for causing his death. So we start with a very high profile case, but we know that there continue to be shoot and kill young black men. A Department of Justice investigation found frequent instances of excessive use of force used against people of color in this community, including unnecessary use of tasers and canines, with no fear from law enforcement that there would be consequences for their conduct. So police accountability, and this is Players Coalition concern, is urgent in that communities all over the country face as they look to local officials, especially the prosecuting attorney, to break this cycle. So the question is, will you investigate and hold police accountable for misconduct, including fatal shootings and the use of excessive force? And I suppose it's fair to ask, well, how will we do so?
So, first and foremost, let's be clear. The prosecutor's office and law enforcement officers work very closely together. Even working in the municipal courts, I have the opportunity to work with a lot of officers. And there's going to develop friendships, and again, there is a clear conflict of interest when you work that closely together. So first and foremost, with cases involving police shootings, we have to implement a policy of a special prosecutor. As much as I trust myself to be fair, and I want to be clear on this point, as much as I trust myself to be fair, it's not just about me. And one thing that we do in a community policing initiative, I'm going to digress just for a second, is that we host groups on the police simulator. And that's so that people can come in free of charge, interact with officers, ask tough questions, and start building some of those, bridging some of those divides. One of the officers that I work with, Captain Farmer, has become one of my best friends. And so if someone accused Captain Farmer of using excessive force, as fair as I think that I can be, inherently, there's going to be some doubt in my mind because I know him, because he's a friend of mine. And so we have to implement policies that actually work, that hold people accountable, just like everyone in this room is held accountable for their actions, even our officers who have the toughest job in the world. And we want to give them all the support that they need, but they still need to be held accountable if they violate the law. And so in addition to a policy of having a special prosecutor, what I think is most important, and I'm going back to the theme of the day of transparency, is that we are going to have a policy that is published and made public so you can read from the script if there's ever an accusation of police shooting or police excessive force. You will know exactly what our office will be doing. You'll be able to see it, and we'll follow that. Because without transparency, you can't have trust.
I'll follow up with a question about, because the prosecuting attorney is elected, which means you have to get campaign support, campaign donations. Will you accept that from police organizations? And by the way, you're not in any danger of getting them now. But
yeah, that's not happening. Now, that's the question I was not prepared for. Because the support that I get is, hey, we're with you, but we can't be public. We can't go public. That's what I get. That's the answer I get from a lot of officers. So there's a lot of officers that are supporting my campaign. But I would imagine you mean running for re-election.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
That's a good question. I think that. Man, I'd have to think that one through. It would be, I don't see why that would change the policy, but man, I guess I'd have to think about that one. I really would. You caught me with that.
They caught you.
Okay, no, good question. I'd like to.
It is a good question. I mean, the question sometimes comes up when someone gets elected to office. It's sort of like the scene in the New Testament of Jesus and the temptation, showing you all the wonderful things, right? And will you succumb to that temptation? That's really the kind of question that this is. So we can move to another question.
It isn't the broader question about campaign finance reform.
Yeah,
and that's something else.
Yeah.
I think money is at the root of all evil when it comes to our government, our politics, and so that's something that I would advocate for. And yeah, I would definitely want to. I'd have to consider that one.
It's also, we live in a country, and I think we might even be the only country in the world that's crazy enough to elect prosecutors.
I won't take exception to that.
You won't touch that. Okay, so I'm not the candidate, I'm gonna let him. The Players Coalition was concerned about a wanted system that they say exists in a place like St. Louis County, where they detain people who the police want to talk to or the prosecutor wants to talk to, even though the individual that's being detained, not accused of a crime. It's a practice that seems to disproportionately affect minorities and people of color. And first of all, what do you think of this practice? And And how extensive is it, and would you end it?
So the wanted system is a way of a warrant without a warrant. It's a way to say, well, we're not arresting them. They just want it for questioning, and I believe that it's unconstitutional. I think that it's unethical personally, and I don't intend to issue on cases that come out of the wanted system, and I think that's some of what the prosecutor's office can do. We can't change every practice, but we can change the behavior. If officers know that if you are using the wanted system, we're not going to issue on those cases. And as a former public defender, I've been frustrated with the wanted system throughout my legal career.
All right, our next set of questions deal with the very critical notion of equal access to justice. And it's often the times that justice is too often denied to people who are without wealth, which of course has the biggest impact on communities of color, making worse the already stark racial disparities in the criminal justice system. So we criminalize poverty through such policies as cash bail, punitive fines and fees, which lead to jail time based on nothing more than a failure to pay the money. So let's talk first about the cash bail system. Every day in St. Louis County, people are jailed simply because they can't afford bail. And poor people get locked up while people who have access to money remain free pending trial. So these are people who are merely accused of a crime, they haven't been convicted. In many cases, people who are jailed never get charged with anything or have their charges dismissed by the prosecuting attorneys. In St. Louis County, over 1,000 people sat in jail last year only to have their cases dismissed or not prosecuted. So you've said, I think previously, that you support bail reform and people should not be jailed solely because they can't afford to pay bail. So what changes, how would you change that? And would you advocate complete abolition of cash bail?
So first and foremost, just to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about. So bail is not meant to be a form of punishment. It's meant to ensure the accused's presence throughout the criminal justice process. Again, not for punishment purposes. And so essentially what we're seeing is that this system has a disproportionate effect on poor people. Obviously, I mean, think this through. The murderer with means gets out, while the nonviolent offender who poses no threat to the community is stuck in jail because they can't afford to pay a $500 or $1,000 bond. Think about a single mother who has small kids and she gets accused of some nonviolent crime. Think about the impact that has. Not only is she very likely to lose, or he likely to lose their job, because many have jobs that aren't just going to wait for them if you just don't show up for 3 days, a week, or a few weeks. You may lose your housing. But let's think about this too. You might lose your kids. I mean, think about that. If you don't have a support system, which many of us don't have, and your kids are now you're incarcerated for however long, you may very well encounter serious hardships. And in addition, what research also shows is that even short prison stays increase the likelihood of reoffending. So to be clear, in no uncertain terms, the cash bail system does not work. My office will not, we will not oppose bond reductions for nonviolent offenders. We will work and we will advocate too in the cash bail system. As you know, the judge makes the final decision, but the prosecutor's office has a lot of weight in that decision. And so our office will have a policy of more of a risk-based, our office will have more of a risk-based policy, I should say. And that is, if someone poses a serious threat to the community, because there's factors that we look at. Severity of the crime. We look at, are they a threat to the community? We also look at other factors, but also risk of flight. And so what we're going to do is, if someone poses a threat to the community or they're at risk of flight, then our position will be that they should not be released, if they're a violent offender. But if they're a non-violent offender, and we see this far too often, people where the prosecutor's office knows that they're going to offer probation, and they're still asking for a cash bond. So our office, if we know that someone is looking at probation and that the recommendation is likely to be probation, we will not ask for a cash bond. And again, with violent offenders, that's different. If someone is accused of a murder, or sexual assault, or things of that nature, our position is that they should not be released. And I don't want it depending on the amount of money they have or don't have.
Just to follow up on that, there's in some jurisdictions around the country, like Philadelphia, the prosecutor's office has a list of offenses for which they will not ask for bail. You have a thought about that?
I think that is probably something that we could look into, and obviously, I've read some of Mr. Krasner's stuff, which I've been very impressed with. Again, I'm not coming up with this stuff. I'm doing my research. Now, obviously, there's philosophies that I agree with, but I think that there's a lot of people around the country that are doing good work, and many of us are going to get the benefit of that. So no, I do think that it would be a good policy to list some of those, be specific, and again, it goes back to being transparent, and list some of those offenses. And when we're talking about nonviolent offenses, drug possession,
some low-level offenses.
Yeah.
That you won't
We will not
seek bail.
Seek bail. Absolutely.
Just like bail, fines and fees disproportionately impact people in poverty. Unpaid fines and fees, as we've seen in this community in the municipal system, even for something as minor as a traffic ticket, can lead to suspended driver's licenses and to jail time. So I think this problem is worse in St. Louis County. Much of it doesn't come to the prosecuting attorney's office. A lot of that is municipal. But it does breed a distrust of police within the communities in this county. So there are these kind of harsh consequences. And so I guess the question for a prosecuting attorney candidate is, will you commit to not seeking a fine or a fee as part of a sentencing recommendation in the cases that you do handle?
Yeah. And first and foremost, we are not going to criminalize poverty. Let me just put that out there. And I want to draw a distinction. I want to draw a distinction between fines and restitution. Restitution is about making a victim whole. If your window is busted, replacing that window would be restitution. But when we're talking about fines, fines are punitive in nature. That money goes to the government. And yeah, I do believe that we need to look at, let me just be clear. As an office, we will not seek fines. We will not seek fines. Again, we know that they have a disparate impact on poor people, people of color, and again, I support policies that work, and these policies have been shown not to work. They have an effect that increases recidivism rates, because all too often people on probation, which we'll likely talk about, are being revoked for reasons such as failure to pay.
So you're basically against incarcerating somebody for failure to pay fines and fees, unless there's real evidence that they're purposely, there's got to be convincing evidence that they purposely won't pay, right?
Yeah, I don't, again, as we evolve, and one thing that I'm really proud of in our region is that the discussions have become much more high level in how we view criminal justice reform, and not just in this region, but across the country. And so yeah, we have to understand what policies work, and we have the data, we have the research, and so many of these policies don't work. They have a disparate impact on poor people, and so no, I will not be asking for fines as a prosecutor.
Here's a topic that I think affects communities in really very profoundly, and that's drug offenses. And the problem of mass incarceration, of course, is made a lot worse when health issues like addiction, mental illness are treated as criminal matters by the police and for the police and the courts to handle, which I think in some sense isn't fair to the police and the courts, but that's another topic. But research really consistently shows that incarceration does not address addiction. It only exacerbates cycles of poverty. And I think the data that the Players Coalition came up with for Missouri is that 35% of people sent to our overcrowded system of prisons are sent there explicitly for drug treatment. So this aggressive prosecution of drug possession laws has really failed to increase public safety, and enforcement of drug laws disproportionately impacts people of color. Now, that's the Players Coalition. I think their data are pretty sound on that. With respect to marijuana, we've recently kind of come to decriminalizing small quantities, but in 2016 there were 2,000 people charged and jailed for possessing marijuana or other drugs or paraphernalia, rather than being diverted away from the criminal justice system into opportunities for treatment. So the question is, can you or would you assure us that you could offer free diversion to all that possess controlled substances? We're not talking about dealers now, but people who are arrested for possession, so that there are people who are arrested with drugs are not prosecuted in the first place, but are given a chance to avoid a criminal history and stay off them.
First, I'd like to ask, who in here has either a family or friend or known someone touched by the opioid crisis or heroin? We have to stop treating, we have to stop treating addiction as a criminal matter and start addressing it as the public health epidemic that it is. And so, and that's why anyone who's heard me speak before knows that one of my biggest platform issues and promises, and I'll say this for you, I don't believe in campaign promises, I don't believe in alternate facts. A promise is a promise. And we are going to implement diversionary programs such as drug court programs, mental health programs. One, because they keep us safer. Two, they save us money, but most importantly, they help people. The biggest demographic of offenders are reoffenders. We know that. And so when we give nonviolent offenders the treatment that they need, they are drastically less likely to progress to violent crimes. And so as a policy matter, my office will not issue on misdemeanor marijuana possession cases. So let me just put that out there. It's being recorded. Book it. We will not. We're going to focus. We want to focus our resources on the serious and violent offenders. And there's so many resources that are taken up by prosecutions of small possession, misdemeanor amounts of marijuana and things of that nature. If someone has a drug problem, instead of a conviction, which increases the likelihood that they'll reoffend, let's give them the treatment that they need. And we want to do, what I intend to do is pre-charge diversionary programs. Because even the stigma of being arrested or being charged, the stigma of a conviction, obviously, we see the impact that it has on people as they try to get jobs, as they try to re-enter society, even after these matters are resolved. So we're going to, when we see someone with a drug problem, we're going to give them the treatment that they need. And what we're going to do is, because currently in the drug court program, there's only 75 people. And let me put that into perspective. Out of 5,000 to 6,000 cases filed last year, only 75 people are in drug treatment, and the gatekeeper for who gets in is the county prosecutor's office. There's never been a commitment to these kind of programs, and the mental health docket is even worse. There's only 12 people on the mental health docket. And same thing, prosecutor's office decides who gets in and who doesn't, and they're sorely underutilized. And again, it's a travesty. It really is, because when we look at, in the last 2 to 3 years, close to 2,600 deaths from opioids, and more when we factor in heroin as well. this is an issue that needs to be addressed, because not only does it keep us safer if we're serious about crime prevention, but again, it also helps people. And we have to start looking at it from a standpoint of policies that work. This tough on crime approach that certain people have tried to espouse. All we've seen are higher crime rates, higher homicide rates, more drug deaths. And at some point, we got to say, when are we going to get serious about really addressing this issue?
So let me bring up a criticism of, I think, a legitimate criticism of drug courts, and I'm not sure if that applies to this county, but certainly when somebody goes to drug court and they put them through a lot of paces, the question is, what do you do with them when they fail? Because a lot of them fail, and the problem that I saw when drug courts became very popular was that when somebody failed drug court, the next stop was prison. We don't punish people for falling out of remission if they're being treated for cancer. But we do punish people who have addictions and fall off the wagon.
And I think that we have to address that issue in our drug treatment program and understand that relapse is a part of the process. We can't, my office will not just kick someone out of the program and prosecute them simply because they encountered a relapse, as we know happens in drug treatment. Also, we see in the prosecutor's office now, the drug treatment program, which is sorely utilized, costs about $1,500. And that cost, and there are a few grants, but by and large, that cost has to be paid for by the participant. And we know people with drug issues sometimes have money issues, right? We know that happens. And not paying is grounds for being removed from the program. And so, no, we have to include potential relapse in our drug treatment programs. We have to endeavor to make them free of charge, particularly for economically challenged and people in poor communities. Because again, this makes us safer, it saves us money, because it costs about $30,000 a year to incarcerate a human being. You save $10,000 to $15,000 per individual when you use these kind of programs. But again, it helps people, it helps families. That's how you build communities. So.
You mentioned opioids and all the young people, some not so young, who are dying of opioid drugs, the prescription medications, and also heroin and fentanyl. So one of the specific questions is, would you have an office-wide policy, which is called a Good Samaritan policy, so that if a person who's with a person who's taking heroin, who starts to overdose, calls the police. The question is, does that person get in trouble when she calls the police and says, hey, there's somebody here who's overdosing?
No. I mean, again, another recurring theme, I support policies that work. That policy does not work. We want to encourage people to report overdoses. We don't want them to live in fear of being prosecuted. So that's one I can answer very succinctly.
Let me go to the next step. Injection sites. Should we have places for people to show up and who are addicts and take their injections?
So, as a policy, I believe that we have to stop looking at drug addiction as a criminal matter. It is a public health epidemic, and if the legislature passes legislation establishing safe injection sites, as the prosecutor, I'll get out of the way.
One of the, and I'm going to move on to charging decisions and sentencing, the prosecutor's role in sentencing. The Players Coalition notes, and I think it's a fair statement, that people are really more than the worst thing that they've ever done. I think there are probably some professional athletes that we forgive them too for that we don't label them, what the worst thing that they've done is who they are. So what we want to see is that reflected in the charging and sentencing decisions of prosecutors. So the question is about favoring rehabilitation over retribution. In other words, helping somebody to get better rather than simply punishing them, providing second chances, avoiding needlessly harsh sentences. So, but prosecutors around the country regularly overcharge defendants to pressure them to give up their constitutional rights and to plead guilty. So sometimes even innocent people are likely to plead guilty when fighting their charges. It might lead to a much more substantial sentence. So should there be a policy that charges the least serious acceptable offense in each case so that we prevent, how do you prevent overcharging?
So, and there's something I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So prosecutors have discretion on not only what is charged, but how many charges in this, and oftentimes, whether there is a felony or a B felony. And so what we see, and I've seen this, I remember a case that I had as a public defender, and I actually still know this gentleman today. He got into a fight, and he was charged with a misdemeanor assault. The prosecutor, now, I think most people know if you get a misdemeanor without priors, you're generally going to get probation, right? I think everyone knows that, okay? I'll take your silence as a yes. And so
He's picking his jury right now.
And so the prosecutor came to me and said, if your client doesn't take 3 months in jail, my understanding, never confirmed, was that the other gentleman who was in the fight had some kind of relationship to someone in the prosecutor's office. I'm not sure about that. That's what I heard. But either way, the prosecutor came and said, if your client doesn't take 3 months in jail for a misdemeanor, no priors, we're going to dismiss and refile it as a felony. And so now a gentleman who had never violated the law before is now potentially facing jail time or a felony. I had one other quick anecdote. I had a client who was charged with some kind of a theft. He was looking at 7 years, but because he was a prior and persistent offender, meaning he had been charged before, the prosecutors threatened and said, if he doesn't take the 5 years or what have you, we're going to refile it as a prior and persistent offender, and he could be looking at 15 years. That's just not right. I mean, we have to assess the cases, determine what is fair, and particularly with nonviolent offenses, why wouldn't we err on the lower end of the sentencing or of the range of punishment? But I think most importantly, we will not, in my office, have a policy of stacking charges to force pleas.
How about the situation where you ask for a more harsh penalty if the guy decides to go to trial and gets convicted?
So
It's a trial tax, you want to go to trial? Fine, go to trial, but if you get convicted, you're going to get a more harsh penalty. Or as one of the federal judges from long ago used to say, if you plead guilty, you'll get mercy. If you go to trial and are found guilty, you'll get justice.
First, before I've been practicing for 17 years, so those two.
It's not a joke.
I've been practicing for 17 years, so those two anecdotes, you can do the math and determine who the prosecutor was at that time. I don't think that someone should be punished for exercising their constitutional rights.
You mentioned the cost of prison in Missouri, and I have to say that 25 years ago, when I went to work in the governor's office, the prison population in Missouri was 13 or 14,000. Now it's 31,000. And I heard recently the director of the Department of Corrections, who I think is doing a wonderful job of analyzing what's going on, say that we have a choice right now. We could either keep going, doing what we're doing, and build a couple more prisons, or we can start reforming what it is. And it's particularly acutely true in the female population. We are number one, right? How do you do that? How do you address that?
I think we have to, again, all of the things that we talked about are not the panacea or the cure-all, but they all address ending mass incarceration. When we refuse to issue on cases that stem just from a marijuana possession, those are ways to help with racial profiling. But they also help us address this issue of mass incarceration. Diversionary programs. When we start saying that, hey, instead of incarceration, we're going to give treatment, and in my treatment programs as the prosecutor, we're also going to embed job readiness programs. These are ways that we start to address these issues of mass incarceration. Again, you know, we are the highest state with respect to females being incarcerated, and I think we're 8th in the country just in general. So we have some issues, and some real issues in this state that need to be addressed, but across the country. And so I think that all the things that we talked about, I don't know if we're going to talk about probation, but even the way that we look at probation and how we revoke people and how long we have people on probation, these are all ways that we can start addressing mass incarceration. Because again, when we talk about diversionary programs, it's a whole lot cheaper to offer these programs than to build more.
So do you think the prosecutors ought to tell the court, well, here's what it's going to cost for this, as opposed to this sentence? When I was on the Missouri Sentencing Advisory Commission, we did that some years ago. We put it into the report that's done, the sentencing assessment report. I'm not sure if it's still in there. The prosecutors were absolutely livid about it. But to say, if you've got a 5-year prison sentence, it's going to cost you $100,000, right? So, but if a probation sentence, it's going to be a couple $1,000s a year or whatever. So, you think we ought to tell them that? And should you, as a prosecutor, take that into account?
Let me say this. I had the criminal justice department at St. Louis Community College. So I've been teaching at the community college for about 8 years now. One thing that I learned is that you put everything on that syllabus, because when a student has a complaint and you can say, hey, here's the syllabus, you saw it, that alleviates a lot of problems. And so I'm using the same line of thinking when I say we have to be transparent with everything that we're doing, because then everyone knows and sees and can predict exactly what's going to happen with our office. And so we will publish that information, we will make it public. We will also, what I intend to do is set up an advisory committee for the prosecutor's office with a cross-section of people from all different fields to be able to address or to look at the things we're doing right, the things that we're doing wrong, the things that we can be doing better. And so, again, transparency, transparency, transparency. That's how you build trust, that's how you build the community.
Let's talk about the death penalty. I don't want to step on your applause lines.
But you did, just
I did. I'm just moving along, okay? The death penalty. And we've, St. Louis, Missouri was, about 4th in the country, I think, over time. And we had a period of time a few years ago when we had a lot of executions. Now we've got Marcellus Williams, who Governor Greitman's stayed his execution and has a
former Governor Greitman.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm in the government. I'm not sure the former sheriff of Polk County, Missouri is going to be quite as free with those computations as our dearly departed Rhodes Scholar, but whatever, you got to take the good with the bad. So the question is, what policies would your office have with respect to seeking the death penalty? Would you just not seek it?
So, 2 things we know about the death penalty. The people who get sentenced to the death penalty are overwhelmingly African American and poor. We know that too many people have been exonerated after wrongful convictions. We know that it costs too much to taxpayer dollars. We know that it isn't the deterrent effect that it was made to be. And so again, I support policies that work, and my office will not seek the death penalty.
Another area touches on something that's been very much in the news the last few days, and that is immigration. And a plea of guilt or a conviction has profound implications for people who are not citizens of the United States. And so the question is, would you be agreeable, would you be committed to offering diversion programs for those low and mid-level offenses so they can be dealt with in the criminal justice system without having a requirement that they admit guilt?
Yeah, and that's what, and I kind of addressed that before when I talked about pre-charge diversionary programs. That's another positive byproduct of those kind of programs because people avoid the actual charge, which could cause immigration issues. And we're talking about obviously nonviolent offenders. So in short, yes.
And would that also include helping to vacate old convictions, where that now becomes a problem with somebody who is perhaps facing deportation?
Yes, and again, we're talking nonviolent offenders. We're not talking about murderers, rapists, and things of that nature. We're talking about nonviolent offenders who, because they weren't aware of their rights, entered into a plea or entered into a diversionary program, like in St. Louis County Drug Court, where you essentially have to admit guilt. And so, yeah, I think that's the just and equitable thing to do.
The next topic is juvenile justice. And juvenile justice, we've been around a couple of ways around this in St. Louis County in particular. And the question is how we handle the prosecution of children. The Supreme Court, interestingly enough, in the cases involving the death penalty and life without parole sentences for people who are juveniles when they commit their offenses, recognizes that the brains of young people haven't fully developed, and so that it has been deemed to be cruel and unusual to give them the ultimate penalty. And that does have, that research bears itself out. Those of us who have been young men, and those of us who have raised young men, know the truth of that. Their brains ain't ready. Okay? I'm not sure what age they are ready, but we assume that it's somewhere around 25, just for the sake of argument. Okay? But so the question is, how do you handle? We've got deep disparities here in the county, racial disparities about how youthful offenders are treated, because we've had the Justice Department here looking at how black children make up only a third of the county's youth population, but they account for 2/3 of the referrals for prosecution from the juvenile system. How do you do that? How do you how do you take bias out of the system? And I suppose, specifically, maybe we look at age. Is there an age, for example, would you commit to like not transferring somebody into the adult system if they're 16 years of age or under? I mean, that's one kind of specific question that the coalition had on their list. It's a fair question.
No, absolutely. You're talking to an educator, so
Yeah.
so first and foremost, I support raising the age to 18. Currently, if you're charged, if you're 17 years old and you're charged with a crime, you'll be prosecuted in the adult court. And that needs to go up, obviously. In Missouri, you can't enter. In Missouri, you can't enter into a contract until you're 18, but if you commit even a nonviolent crime, you're going to the workhouse if you're in the city, which also needs to be shut down. That's a different story. And so, to the second part of that is the prosecutor's office doesn't have a whole lot of decision making in the juvenile courts. Obviously, the legal officers, as the prosecutors are called in juvenile court, are not under the purview of the county prosecutor's office. However, the prosecutors do get to make a recommendation in a certification hearing. A certification hearing being when the legal officers want to have a juvenile charged as an adult. And so our office's policy will be that kids should stay in juvenile court where they're getting appropriate treatment.
And I assume that may exclude those who are charged with a capital offense or some really serious crime. But of most of the other crimes, you keep them in the juvenile system. Is that what you're
I think they should stay in the juvenile system. And, I had a really good conversation about this particular issue recently. And let's even talk about even serious crimes. A kid, that's 15 or 16 that commits some horrible act. Do you think that's normal for a 16-year-old?
No.
I don't think so. I think that it goes, if a 15 or a 16-year-old is doing something like that, then there's some mental health issues. And one thing that I would support that other states implement more of are dual jurisdiction laws where someone, if they are committing a murder or something like that, can still receive the treatment that they might receive, that they would receive in the juvenile court.
Another question, I suppose, is the maturity level of young people when they're talking to the cops, the interrogations that take place of a child, somebody who's being questioned without the presence of a parent, guardian, or a lawyer.
I mean, that was, again, so I started as a public defender, and as the when I started as the newbie, I had to handle all the juvenile cases because no one wanted to handle them. I ended up enjoying it, but that was always something that I had a serious problem with. We know that young people, I mean, I can't get, when I substituted when I was in college and a junior high student, I couldn't get them just to sit still or do a simple assignment. So to expect that they understand the intricacies and complexities of some of our laws is just insane. And so, no, there should be a parent present.
When you have somebody who's going to be sentenced, who's 18 or younger, and they're in the adult court for a serious crime, should we treat them as though they are adults for the purpose of giving them a really long sentence, or would you cut that off at a shorter term in terms of your recommendation to the court?
I think that when we have young people committing serious crimes like that, we have to give them the treatment that they need. Whether it be drug treatment, mental health treatment, that needs to be the focus. Because again, a 15-year-old that is committing heinous crimes, there's something more than just nefarious intent. And I think and that's why when I talk about dual jurisdiction and things of that nature, is so that we can focus more on the treatment aspect.
Let people know what dual jurisdiction is. That's where they're treated both as a child and as an adult.
So you have a juvenile who was sent to the adult court, and so now in a dual jurisdiction, if you will, they are able to receive the same services that they would receive in the juvenile court, which is all about rehabilitation. And that's one thing that we have to distinguish between the juvenile court and the adult court. The juvenile court is about rehabilitation. You don't go to jail if you're a juvenile, you get treatment. So even places like DYS, the Division of Youth Services, we're still talking about a place where kids hate going, but they're still going, they're getting their education, they are getting any treatment that they need, any psychological evaluations. We're preparing them to re-enter society. We're giving them the tools in the toolbox they need to be productive citizens.
Finally, we've got a few more questions, and then I want to have you. I know somebody's been collecting questions. You can bring them up, but we're getting to you talked about transparency in the office, and I can get specific about a couple of things. One is, if there's an assistant prosecuting attorney who's withholding evidence that's favorable to the defense, and sometimes that's shown, that's a violation of the Constitution. What would you do with that person? I mean, that's a person on your staff who might be playing loose with the rules.
Someone who is intentionally withholding information, which is an ethical violation, which is a legal violation, and could result in someone losing their freedom or liberty, they need to be terminated.
I think that's a commitment. And when you read, and I've read a lot of the innocence cases where people have been found innocent, an awful lot of time. It's exactly that, withholding evidence that might show that the person's not guilty.
And just to add to that, again, we have an ethical obligation, and the law says that you need to, attorneys, both sides actually, should turn over all evidence. And so we can't cherry pick what we want to turn over to the other side. Again, the prosecutor's role is not to incarcerate people. The prosecutor's role is to pursue justice.
Another practice that the Supreme Court of the United States has said is out of bounds is excluding people from jury service because of their race. And it's called the Batson violation. And Batson versus Kentucky is the case, and you can't do that. But it happens. And most of the Batson cases that I dealt with when I was on the court came from this county. And there's reasons for that. There's, just in terms of the changing demographics of the county and so forth. But if you found that one of your assistants was striking jurors just because of their race, what would you do?
Same answer. That's an ethical violation. I believe it to be a legal violation. And if someone was consistently and intentionally doing that, they need to be terminated. At the very least, if we saw it happen one time and we decided that, hey, this issue needs to be addressed. Maybe these weren't the worst offenders, but that needs to be addressed. And again, there's some people that need to be cleared out of that office anyway. So.
One more question, the Players Coalition questions, and then I'm going to just take these just right off as I got them. The final question the Players Commission really had a coalition was about turning over evidence to the defense. When I was first out of law school, I clerked in a federal court where the judge simply said to the prosecutor, open your file. We don't need emotions. So the question is, would you open the files and let the defense look and see what you got?
Yes.
If elected, I'm on the questions from you all. If elected, would you encourage the police department to use body cameras?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another one I could just say yes. I think that, again, in the interest of transparency, and that's in confidence in our criminal justice system, which is sorely lacking currently. It's not a panacea, it's not a cure-all, but it absolutely helps build confidence in what law enforcement officers are doing or not doing. So yes.
Another question related to transparency. In what ways would you distribute information in order to achieve one of your primary goals, which is transparency? In other words, what are the best ways to keep the public informed?
I think we have to, taking advantage of technology and posting this data on the website consistently, making it available to anyone, be it handouts in the prosecutor's office. And again, I intend to, there's probably some people in this room I hope to serve on our advisory committee. And so if there's some other ways that we can be creative to come up with, to make sure that we're being transparent and making sure that information is available to people who may not be on the internet, then let's do it. I think that makes my job easier. When people know what to expect, they know what the policy is. I think that makes the job a whole lot easier.
Here's a question. This is a question that's personal. Can you explain why you worked as a municipal court prosecutor and judge if you believe that the criminalization of poverty is wrong?
I think that we know that these positions exist, and I think it's important that we have people who are going to be fair in those positions. One thing that I always said, whether you're on the prosecution side or the defense side, we need good people First and foremost, we need good people. That's how the system works. And one thing that I can say, and I'm proud of, is after August 2014, I've been on the bench maybe a year. My court was the first court to write an order issuing universal warrant recall. We recalled every single warrant. Later on, after I found out that I could do it, because we had to do some research, that's when we withdrew, we dismissed every case past, I think, 3 to 5 years old, because that was in the interest of justice. So I don't think it's the job you hold, it's what you do with that job. Helping to bring about uniform fine structure across St. Louis County. Because many of us know that you go on one street in St. Louis County and you get a ticket, it's $100. Go down 2 more blocks and now the same infraction is $200. And so those are some of the things that needed to be addressed. And one elephant in the room that I think many of us know, but many of us don't, is that the culture of the municipal courts pre-2000, I'm going to say 2015, when we really started seeing these reforms implemented, which I'm very proud. Many of these we were implementing before it was a thing, before August of 2014. But many of these reforms, when we talk about municipal court reform, when we talk about even some of these reforms that need to be extended to the circuit level, because any highway patrol cases are handled in St. Louis County courts, and a lot of these reforms don't apply to St. Louis County. And I think that if they are the fair thing to do with the municipal courts, then it should be the same policy in the circuit.
This is somewhat related. What were your reactions? And by the way, in the municipal court system, I was arrested for speeding in one of those bells. bells up there.
Actually arrested?
Yeah, I mean, they gave me a ticket and they took away my driver's license and made me show up. So I came in and I tried my case, which puzzled the judge. She didn't know what I was doing. This was in 1981. And she took the case under advisement, but I asked for my license back so I could wait for the decision without having a license on me. That was in 1981. I'm still waiting for the decision, by the way. It's not terribly well organized. It was weird for them to have a trial. It wasn't much of a trial. I was happy the loss won, but so here the question is: so what were your reactions to those who participated? You're resident in Ferguson, in the violent unrest in Ferguson, and how do you believe civil disobedience should be prosecuted or not? I mean, that's really, I think, a serious question. You have people demonstrating, and then you get some situations that may turn ugly.
So first and foremost, we have to distinguish between protesters, peaceful protesters, and those who would commit violence. And the overwhelming majority of activists and protesters were nonviolent. And I do want to add, because a lot of people don't realize this, is that when there were people that were trying to throw bottles and harm people, those were protesters talking them down and telling them that wasn't appropriate. I think this country was built on protests. I think that when we look at me being on this stage today without protests in the 1960s in the civil rights movement, I would not be here, I would not be a viable candidate if not for the sacrifice of many protesters and activists. So I wanted to not criticize those who would push for rights and push for equal rights and things of that nature. I would rather fight to give them a reason not to protest. How about that?
Protesting, we're not Americans.
We can find something else to protest about if we implement good policies.
So, getting back to the police, there's a question here about police conduct. Do you think the police can police themselves? And the question is really pointed in a direction that is, do you think there should be a civilian
Yes, I think that when you police, when you are supervising yourselves. I grew up with three brothers, and when our parents left the house, it wasn't the best situation. And they came back to coffee tables destroyed, cars missing, which I had nothing to do with. So stuff happens. And so I think the Civilian Review Board, which was also, there's only been 3 passed in the state of Missouri, and then 1 outstate Missouri, St. Louis City, and Ferguson.
Well, one of the problems that when you talk about having a civilian oversight board in St. Louis County, you've got, 68 police departments? Should we put them under a civilian?
60.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about the county police department. They're not everywhere. There's 68 places in the county where they're not necessarily. So you have one. Can you envision a civilian oversight board for the police in the county generally?
I do think that we have to start thinking regionally. I think we have to start, and St. Louis is a unique experiment, if you will, considering that we're one of 2 or 3 home rule cities which is why you see so many municipalities. And that would be a challenge, because you have these sovereign municipalities, and so I'm not certain exactly what that would look like. Because if you have a civilian review board, does Chesterfield have to follow the rules of a review board that was established with other cities? So I think that would be a challenge, but I think that is something that we should endeavor to work toward. I think that it's going to take some conversations, and it might even take legislation.
Should we, if you were going to be favoring legislation, should we consolidate police departments so we don't have 68 of them? I mean, in one trip to the airport, from here, I've seen 3 different municipalities arresting people. So, we've certainly given them something to do.
I didn't realize this was a county executive debate. I don't know if that's not something that the county prosecutor can implement. But as I said before, I do support regional. We have to approach these issues regionally. That's why I'm a big advocate for the North County Police Department. That was a police department that was created with an emphasis on community policing, and several cities have now joined because
the North County Collaborative.
The North County Policing Collaborative, right?
Anyway, there's a question here about your interest in having diversion programs, especially your commitment to free diversion programs. And the question is, what if the county comes to back and says, Mr. Bell, we don't have the money or enough money for these diversion courts or whatever this fancy stuff is you want to do.
Fancy stuff. So first of all, I want to clarify the question. This is not an interest in diversionary programs. It's a promise to expand diversionary programs. And we have to look in the long range. We have to look long range. These programs save us money. And so and let's just say we're going to expand these programs, and let's just say we do need more money because we're finding that we're saving lives, then it is incumbent on me as the county prosecutor to use my platform to publicly go to the county council, to publicly go to Jefferson City, to publicly and aggressively pursue federal grants to get the money. And then when I publicly do it, I hope everyone in this room has my back, and they're at that meeting, at those county council meetings, saying, hey, these are things that we need to do, because they may cost money. And again, they'll save us money long term, but most importantly, they save lives.
Let me with the final question. Relates right to that. It's actually a question that says that some prosecutors, and they mentioned the one in Texas, have made a strong move to restorative justice and have had failures in tracking success as to recidivism within some of those programs. So in terms of these programs that you put in place, how do you plan to evaluate them as you introduce them? And how will you communicate and redress those that aren't working? Because I think that's part of what, you know, when you're setting up a program, a diversion program of some kind, what are we doing? You know?
So I think we, again, I think we have to leave room to evolve. The practices that we implement day one in January of 2019, we're going to learn about programs and practices that are even better down the road, and we have to leave space for that. So one, I think it starts with the transparency piece. We have to publish that data. We have to analyze that data.
And programs that don't work.
And end programs that don't work, absolutely. Again, I support policies that work and those that don't need to end, no question. And so we have to be open to that. I think the antiquated notion of a prosecutor is, oh, conviction rates, send people to jail, stick out my chest. And all it's gotten us is higher crime rates, higher violent crime rates, higher sexual assault rates. And we're not talking about just about a few percentages. Since 2014 to 2017, our homicide rate in St. Louis County shot up over 90%. Our sexual assault rate shot up over 200%. And that's under the antiquated notion of quote unquote tough on crime. So I'm going to suggest that we be smart on crime.
Hey. And this will be the last one.
Do I get a chance to close?
Yeah, you can close. All right. So I'll skip my question. Why don't you close? I see by the clock on the wall, we have 4 minutes left. You can have 2 of them, and we'll give the other 2 to the audience to get out of here.
Okay.
No,
So,
just kidding.
so first and foremost, School Board Member Jason Wilson, Clayton School Board Member, has graciously opened the Coffee Shop Northwest, which is almost right next door. So if anybody wants to head over there and continue the conversation, please join us. We'll be there. And so, in this election, you have a clear choice. You have a clear decision, a clear option, I should say. And we can do the same thing that we've been doing, which across the board has not worked. Again, we've seen continued crime. Our crime rates are going up, literally across the board. It's costing us this model of this mass incarceration model has continued to take away generations of our citizens. This drug, we're seeing thousands of drug deaths, and so we can keep doing the same thing, or we can try something different and try something that we know works. My office will not focus on incarcerating nonviolent offenders. We're going to focus our efforts on the serious and violent offenders that do need to be held accountable. I mean, we know that. And I'll say this, when you start harming people, as much as I try to help people and work with people, when you start harming people, you lose my sympathy. But we know that people don't jump right into violent crime. There's a progression. When we get them at the nonviolent level, when we give them the resources, the drug treatment, mental health treatment that they need, we know that they are less likely to reoffend. They're more likely to be productive citizens. And instead of the window dressing that we're doing now, which I call the political fallacies, where politicians do just enough so that they can brag about what they did come election time. But when we look at 5,000 to 6,000 cases filed last year, and we know that 80 to 85% of individuals that come in contact with the criminal justice system are in need of drug treatment. That's not good enough. We can't just be adequate with diversionary programs with drug treatment. We have to excel at those programs because we all benefit. And so on August 7th, I'm asking for your support. We're taking on a 30-year incumbent who doesn't even feel the need to address the public as a public servant. but because he's entrenched, and so he doesn't feel the need to answer questions. Well, one thing that I've learned as the Ferguson City Councilman is that you cannot get anywhere without community engagement. When I come up with the greatest plan in the world and it fails, everybody's pointing at me, right? But when we come with solutions together, and they don't work, well, now it's a we problem, and those problems are a whole lot easier to fix, right? When we're all invested, when we're all stakeholders. And so we will, as prosecutor, we will continue to have these kind of town halls. I intend to be accountable. I think as a councilman, I think people know that if you have a question, you know where I stand. And I will continue that as your county prosecutor if I get the honor of serving. So with that said, August 7th is the election. I am asking for your support. I'm asking for your legs to knock on doors. I'm asking for your voice to make phone calls. Indivisible St. Louis has endorsed us. We're writing 30,000 postcards. Come help us write postcards. The Young Democrats have endorsed us. They're helping. They're getting out knocking doors. We appreciate them. We're receiving so many other endorsements as well. And if I start listing them, I'm going to start forgetting them. That's a good problem to have. And so again, I ask for your support. I ask for your help, and we ask for your time, this is a big election, and this election matters. We're talking about the prosecutor, and for far too long, this office ran under the radar. But now I think our eyes are open. We're waiting